I really appreciate you letting me not only interview you, but you telling me your story.
It's been a time. And you know what? Being home, I got to tell you a story about David, the one that just was in the hospital. Now, David, 12 years ago, because Tommy was still with us. Tom had passed about 11 years ago, so he was still with us. So it had to be 12 years ago. And I tell this to the nurses in the hospital whenever we go, because I told them about David, and he's like the miracle guy.
Yeah.
And this is when they really got it down, because Tommy was still with us, so he hadn't gotten the double pneumonia and all that.
Right.
So David was our first experience with non-symptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This was a Sunday morning that year. It was December the 3rd. And they were all in the family room watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
And he could talk yet. He could still talk. 11 years ago, 12 years ago, he could still talk. So he just didn't look right to me.
Yeah.
I took his vitals, I took his temperature, his blood pressure, his pulse, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do oxygen at that time, but took the vitals. And everything was fine, everything was normal.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't look right to me.
Something didn't
And I
your
said,
mother's intuition.
Are you okay? Did you hurt someplace? And he said, no, I'm fine, Mom, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband looks at me, he says, he's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Look at I said, something's not right, I don't know what it is. But anyway, I said, I'm taking him over to the hospital and this was a Sunday morning. I'm taking him over to the hospital and have him checked out because something is not right and I don't know what it is. So I took him to Toledo Hospital myself, put him in the van, took him over to the Toledo Hospital, and they went through, did everything, checked him in, they, took blood and they took urine and the whole thing, and they sent him home. And they said, he's fine. Mrs. DuPont, he's fine. And I said, okay, but something's not right. I don't know what it is. So I took him home. About 9 o'clock, between 8 and 9 o'clock the next morning, because they were up in the family room watching TV already. Yep. So it was early in the morning, and they called me from Toledo Hospital emergency room, and they said, Mrs. DuPont, I'm calling about David. You have to bring David back to the hospital. He's very sick. I said, he's sitting in the family room watching TV with his brothers, and he looks fine to me today, but what's wrong? What'd you find? Well, just bring him back to the hospital, please. So I called my family doctor, who was Dr. Facey at that time, and I said, have you heard anything about David? Because they're telling me I have to take him back to the hospital. And he said, no, I haven't, but if they said that, do that.
Right.
So I did. Took him back to the hospital. They put him right in ICU.
Wow.
They told me he had E. coli in his blood.
Wow.
They didn't know how the E. coli got into his blood, but he was very sick. So the doctors they're all working with him, and he's smiling. He's flirting with the nurses like my voice did, He's talking and he's having a great old time. And the third day that he was there, the doctor came in while I was there, and he's palpating his abdomen, and he said, well, he let me know if he's in pain. And I said, if he feels it, he will. Of course he would. He's not going to, fake pain, but.
Right.
He said, we did a CAT scan on him earlier, and he said, there's something by his gallbladder, and it just doesn't look right. We can't figure out in the scan what exactly it is. So he said, in the morning, I'm going to take him in, I'm going to do a laparoscopic, and it will take me about an hour and 15 minutes. And I said, well, what time are you going to do this? And he said, about 8 o'clock. I said, I'll be here. So my daughter went with me, and we, ushered him in, and took him off for surgery, and we sat there in the waiting room, and we waited for him to come out. 3.5 hours later.
Wow, and you were told it was only going to be like an hour?
And 10 to 15 minutes. I saw him come out. At that time, the elevators were by the waiting room and stuff, and anyway, this man came out, and he leaned against the wall by the elevators, and he said everything on us.
Yep.
And I ran out of the room, and I said, is he okay?
Right.
You told me it was going to be an hour, 10, 15 minutes, and I said, it's been 3.5 hours.
Right.
He looked at me and he said, I don't know why he's alive.
Wow.
He said his gallbladder has been ruptured for more than a week.
Oh my goodness.
He said his abdomen is full of peritonitis. I have been suctioning pus pockets out of his abdomen for the last 45 minutes, And Mrs. DuPont, I do not know how he survived this.
Oh my goodness.
So that's the non-symptomatic. See, if I hadn't taken him to the hospital, they'd have never known that. He'd have died at home in his bed or someplace, and they'd have never known why he died.
Oh my goodness. And that's real. Like, listen to your gut.
God's honest story. This is exact. I tell the nurses, you can go back in the charts in this hospital because that's when they listed him, this disease.
Yes.
And maybe there's other ones out there, but I hope not for the parents that are taking care of people, because this is. But if he'd have been, my point was, if he'd have been in a home someplace, nobody saw that.
No, because they don't. Again, it's a mother's intuition. They don't know your child like you do.
Right.
I never could understand it. I'm not a mother, so I don't understand the bond.
That's the best job in the world.
I can never understand the bond where that mother intuition is so real. Like, you know your kid more than the kid probably knows himself.
Yeah.
So wow.
Yeah, it was just, that was there's this expression out now lately these days about the God wink. Well, that was the God wink that told me there's something wrong with him, because I didn't,
Yeah, you would have.
If I'd have ignored myself at home and took the stats and they'd have been okay, and it's just ignored that, I just couldn't ignore it if something was not right, and I didn't know what it was. So
definitely good.
And they didn't either, because they had him 3 days in the hospital and they couldn't figure anything out, because and he was talking and happy and smiling and so no signs, there's no pain.
No, nothing.
And that's the problem with this disease for me at home, because he has
no pain.
Even now he's at the end of this, and I know it. He's 51, and he just spent Monday through Saturday, a week in the hospital, Monday through Sunday, and
wow.
They found a bug in a blood culture that they hadn't originally found, so they had him on 2 antibiotics, and one that went in his button that they crushed and put in water and went in his button, but they had 2 IVs, and then eventually 2 days later they switched one IV to another medicine, and then so this was, he went in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday they got the blood culture back, I guess it was, and there was another bug they found, so now they found out that, or a different bug, whatever they had, or the culture had grown more or something, however cultures do, I'm not into that, but, so they DC'd the other 2 meds and put him on another one, which he's on at home now, and this is another new experience for me, because I get to do IVs now, and I've never done IVs in my life.
Yeah.
And when I was in LPN school 50 years ago now,
I'm sure it's
LPNs
different.
were not allowed to do medicines at all, let alone IVs. Oh my gosh, that was all RN stuff. But so my mother, I was laughing at myself, because my mother was a LPN for 15 years after my dad died. She went through LPN school when she was 50. And I'm driving down the road, and I'm talking to my mom, and I'm going, Mom, I was really nervous about him coming home with an IV. That had never happened before. And I said, you know what? I said, you were an LPN for 15 years at Riverside Hospital, and you never got to do IVs, but I get to do IVs.
Wow.
So,
wow.
You have to keep living as long as you can live.
Absolutely.
My youngest sister was over at the house while my son was home from California for my 80th birthday, and she came over to see him. And she was wondering why I had been off running my granddaughter to Barnes & Noble. And I said, because she needed books for school. She needed books that she had to have. You need to start settling down. You and I are going to have a long talk sometime. And I said, I'm looking at her, she's 16 years younger than me. And I'm going, okay, Ruth Ann, we'll have a talk.
Yeah.
And Joe's standing there, my oldest son, he's going to be 60 in September. He says, Ruth Ann, you might as well stop it now. She's not going to quit. He said, and why should she?
Right.
He said,
absolutely.
As long as people can move, they should move.
Absolutely.
As long as they can do, they should do.
Absolutely.
And I looked at him and said, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.